Hi everyone, welcome. We're down here in my wormery, preparing to check in on these two yellow buckets. These systems have African night crawlers living in them. The buckets are now 206 days of age, and it's been 12 days now since we last checked in on them and fed them, so I believe that they're probably due. That last feeding we gave them 12 days ago was a really tempting, delicious meal. We took coffee filters, 3 coffee filters, and stuffed them full of bits of pumpkin, and then we buried them down here somewhere in the middle. Over here beneath that little piece of bubble wrap we just removed, it's always kind of cool to see all these nice freshly deposited castings out on the top surface where things are nice and damp. Out here on the edges where there's no cover, the material, as you can see, is a little drier just from its color. You could tell right away, but you don't have to go very deep to find worms hanging out right away. There they are. And I guess right here in the middle where it's a little more damp, we'll find even more. This system has gradually accumulated all kinds of leftovers, I assume. This is, I believe, maybe the chunk of a pumpkin stem. It's definitely far gone and breaks pretty readily in my hands. In the past, I've not really done much to help pumpkin stems along. I always just sort of leave them there. But at this point, when it's this far gone already, that the stuff just crumbles under the least amount of pressure in your hands, it's kind of tempting to crush it a little bit. So I'm curious to see how things turned out down there in the feeding zone with those little care bundles we left for them. It does seem realistic after 12 days to expect to find virtually nothing of it, except maybe some worms still hanging out, seeing if they could, I don't know, salvage any remaining little bits of what was put in there. So this looks to me just like a clear leftover with some pumpkin skin. All of the yummy, fleshy part of the pumpkin was all nibbled away for the most part. This is probably just coffee filter. So I also smell little bits of leftover orange peel. The orange peel was already leftovers last time when we checked in 12 days ago. And I think the previous feeding had also been 12 days, so those might go back 24 days or maybe even longer at this point. I can't recall. So we've already gotten a little sample of what the outcome of our last feeding was. I don't think we're going to find a whole lot more as far as leftovers go. I just feel more inclined right now, not so interested in the leftovers of the last feeding. I just feel like I want to try to aerate some of this material. Because when I did excavate, it felt to me a little bit damp and muddy. I'm sure the worms don't mind. And it all feels like it kind of crumbles easily enough, like it's not so heavily compacted. But still, it does seem to me like these systems might benefit from getting a little bit more airflow. So let's create a little bit of a space down here into which we could drop today's feeding. Here's what I've got for them today. There's some bits and pieces of Brussels sprouts, and on this side it's the leaves of some radishes. Even little bits of the radish remain here with the leaves from the little what do they call a unit? A bushel? No. What do they call a bunch? A bunch of radishes? Is that what it is? Alright. So, worms everywhere. We just aerated a little bit more than we absolutely would have need to have done in here. I mean, it is always kind of fun to explore the feeding zone, knowing that there's going to be plenty of worms hanging out there, nipping off the leftovers. So there are a good many worms hanging out all over the place in here. Let me go grab their food and maybe some bedding, and then we'll proceed. My prepared bedding is a combination of shredded paper and cardboard and leaves and moisture. And not a whole lot of anything else. That is a lot of bedding. I just sort of figured I would go for a good size handful, and it just after I placed it in here seemed like perhaps a bit much, but I don't think the worms are going to mind too much. Here's about half of the radish leaves, and there's not so many of the Brussels sprout cuttings. I think we've left about an equal amount of veggie matter for the second bucket. Let's get rid of a little bit of coffee. And sometimes I like to dress up the coffee with a little bit of my worm chow. And that's pretty much their feeding. Nice big quantity of bedding. I think the worms are going to like that. And as tempting as it is to maybe let this system air out a little bit more than normal, perhaps leave the plastic coverings off, I think we're just going to stick with keeping things nice and damp down here for these little guys. This way they remain active and near the surface and all over the place, instead of having that feeling like they got to shy away due to an absence of moisture. Let's get bucket number 2 in our sights and get these little guys fed too. So yeah, 206 days difference, in their ages. Both systems are 206 days of age, and it has been 12 days since we fed both of them, but the main discrepancy of bucket number 2 over here is the shortfall on the number of feedings the system has received, which here is 16, I believe, and 4 ahead of that is feeding number 20, just that went into bucket number 1. So it's because we did set it and forget it over here, which means we did give them a huge amount of bedding in the very beginning, prior to the forget it stage. And then we kind of just neglected the system. We would peek in here, just take a quick look once in a while, maybe when we would come in here to feed bucket number 1, but bucket number 2, the most we would ever do is sort of just take a peek inside, make sure everything was still looking happy and healthy, and then back to the process of forgetting it and ignoring it. So here I guess this has got to be, if we look inside of it, you can already see the little bits of pumpkin remaining, little leftover fragments of it. They'll work it all down eventually. It's nice and juicy. I bet they're enjoying this. So as we did in bucket number 1, bucket number 2 is going to get some prepared bedding too, and I might as well go for it. Just be nice and generous with these guys too. Yeah, that's a nice quantity of bedding. And what remains of the goods for today's feeding. Stuff is already thawing and getting damp and sticky. Let's make sure it all ends up down here in the worm bin. So Brussels sprouts, radish leaves, and nice little sprinkling of some coffee, a little bit of worm chow, and that'll be it. Alright, let's bring some material back in here. Here we didn't till up the outer edges the way we did over in bucket number 1. Maybe just a quick probe down to see how things feel. Here somehow, I don't know, definitely an abundance of moisture. I could feel it, and it is a little clumpier. But let's see how this side looks. Somehow I'm just not getting that sense like things in here are quite as damp as over in bucket number 1. Bucket number 2 here, seems like things are a little bit more crumbly and loose. But I think we're just going to stick with it and keep going. Last time too, I remember bumping into a really bright piece of paper. It seemed like, how is it that it's not breaking down? Is it? Could have been part of what we gave them today. Oh, some bright little bits in there too. Maybe that's where it came from. So whatever, we're done here. Doesn't matter so much. Let's just make sure we're not taking any hitchhikers with us. Alright, I think my glove is clear. And with that, we're done with the now 206-day-old yellow buckets African night crawlers. Doing really well in here, I think. They seem happy and healthy. And I guess just another notation on the material in here. We've talked about how it looks and feels damp. It also feels damp from the weight of it, because these buckets are getting pretty heavy too. I don't know. We'll go one more time with the plastic coverings, but maybe next time we'll be switching to paper. But for now, this is the way we're going to leave it. And hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.